Why do you think there was a big disagreement over how states are represented in Congress? In other words, why do you think there was a disagreement over how many representatives each state gets? So look at this. As you can see here, our Senate has 2 representatives for each state. So you've got 100 members divided by 2. That's 50. We have 50 states. So that's equal representation. However, our House has 435 members. Why the difference? Well, the House has a representative, their number of representatives are based on population. So a state with more people has more representatives. For example, a larger state like California has 39 million people living there versus Mississippi has 4 million. So California has significantly more House of Representatives than Mississippi. What if our country had a unicameral Congress? That means only one house, and it was based on population. States like Mississippi would have way less representatives, which means way less votes on bills. So, for example, if we were voting on legalization of marijuana, Mississippi might only have 4 representatives, and imagine California having 40. And let's just say California believes in the legalization of marijuana and Mississippi does not. Well, Mississippi would lose that vote. Kind of see why representation is kind of important. In order to determine which plan they would use in this new constitution, the delegates had to solve several problems. The first was Congress and how they're selected. The Connecticut delegates solved this, and it's eventually going to become called the Great Compromise because this had caused a lot of tension. Their compromise decided on a bicameral house. Remember, bi means 2. One with equal representation and one based on population. Basically, compromise. So we talked about the necessity of compromise. This one solved a major problem. So if you notice here, Mississippi has 4 representatives in the House, while California has 53. And again, Mississippi has only 4 million people living there, while California has 39 million. Do you think that's fair? Why or why not? Our next compromise solved another major problem around representation. In terms of the House, states with slaves could count their slaves, which gives them more representatives. So maybe I have 100,000 free people and then 10,000 slaves. That gives me more representatives. So the question asks, should they be allowed to use their slaves in their population? This was another super large debate. So they come up with the 3/5 compromise, and make sure you fill that in if it's empty or whichever one is empty. The 3/5 compromise basically decided that slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a man. Yeah. However, free states had some get back when they decided that, all right, well, we'll count your slaves as 3/5 of a man, but when it comes to taxes, you get to count those slaves in your population. So what that means is the higher your population, the more money you pay to the government in taxes. So we're going to count them slaves up in there too. All right, our last compromise involves slavery again. Most delegates knew that Congress should regulate trade. Remember, we talked about if they didn't regulate trade, you'd have unequal pay, children working, unfair working conditions, and a host of other things. So everybody agrees that Congress should regulate this, both foreign and interstate. So if you don't know, foreign means outside of our nation. So we live in the United States, so anything outside of the United States is considered foreign, even if it's in the same continent. So Mexico is technically in the same continent, but it's a foreign nation, same as Canada. Interstate means between the states. However, the South had some concerns, mainly that Congress would tax exports. Exports simply mean products that are shipped outside your nation or products that are shipped to foreign nations. So they're concerned that Congress is going to tax their exports and use that money to fund the national government. Well, the number one export happened to be tobacco. And tobacco was mainly done in the South. They also worried that Congress might interfere with slavery. Therefore, the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise is created. It was pretty simple. Basically, you'd have no tax on export goods, and they could not interfere with slavery until 1808. These laws were essentially eradicated or done away with after 1865. Why do you think that is? Number one, how does the Constitution promote public good? Number two, how does the Constitution support individual rights? In other words, for number one, how does the Constitution promote the well-being of the majority or most of the people? And then the second question asks you, how does the Constitution then balance that with supporting individuals? So how do I take care of the majority of people and also look out for the little man? So let's look at an example over here. We have freedom of assembly, which takes care of individual rights. You have the right to assemble, but you do not have the right to riot, which would destroy public good. So that's an example. Give me an example in the guided notes. It's going to be one of your questions. Don't use an example I just gave. Now, you can use one of these, but not the freedom of assembly one. This section of chapter 2 might give you an idea that there was just disunion at the Philadelphia Convention. And yes, they did disagree. There were candidates from 12 different states. They were from different geographic regions, different economic terms. They were on different economic terms. And most of them were only looking out for what was best for their state. For example, many Southerners wanted to make sure that slavery was not threatened because that was how America was funded. However, they agreed on a lot of things. They knew they needed a new national government, that the articles were not working. They believed in popular sovereignty. Remember, that means voting. They wanted limited government. They didn't want a government that infringed upon all of their rights. They wanted a representative government, so that means representatives vote on bills. They believed in separation of powers and checks and balances, which would keep government limited and keep it from a dictatorship. They mostly disagreed on how Congress should be structured, who would be president, and how he or she would be selected. How does the Constitution balance public good and individual rights? I'm looking forward to reading your answers. Make sure you remember to hit submit or mark as done in GC. And I'm just going to show you how to do that. All right, so you see here, make sure you hit turn in or mark as done, whichever one hits.